Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly. How did Israelis' intelligence failure become so massive as to allow this attack on October 7th to happen? Now, one answer can be is that certain demagogues decided it was better for them to tell IDF soldiers to refuse orders, causing chaos and havoc within the ranks. Ehud Barak's poisonous pyromania threatens Israeli democracy. Barak has never expressed remorse for his flagrant offenses, for the near plundering of Jerusalem, and for his near subversion of democracy. It would be nice to write about national unity, shared destiny, moderation, and restraint, but I cannot ignore the actual history of the events, the unbridled confrontation, the inflammatory demagoguery, the violent warmongering that has become standard and acceptable behavior for some of Israel's once and supposed leaders. There are very specific people responsible for this degradation, with Ehud Barak taking first place in the ugly contest for the most hateful, most extreme, most seditious rabble-rousers of all. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak appears at every anti-government protest rally and in every foreign television studio with preening self-confidence, sky-high arrogance, and the most untamed political language heard in this country in decades, says the Israeli writer. He savages Prime Minister Netanyahu and anybody to the right of him as dark and dangerous ultranationalists who are undermining the foundations of Zionism and Israeli democracy. He blabbers uncontrollably about Israel becoming a fascist state in an apartheid country. He even called the recent Israeli Supreme Court ruling that went in Netanyahu's favor a Weimar Republic-like decision. This year he has escalated his rhetoric to talk about the shattering of Israeli democracy, the darkest days Israel has known, imminent dictatorship in Israel, and silencing by the right wing. Funny, Barak doesn't seem so silenced, does he? In one speech I heard, Barak hurled the epithet fascist at Netanyahu 3 times, dictator at Justice Minister Levin 4 times, and apartheid at right-wing West Bank settlement policies another 3 times. He then accused all Israelis to his political right of wearing Nazi-style selection eyeglasses, which is a disgusting political slur whether used by an anti-Semitic non-Jew or a born-again wannabe Israeli leader. To this, Barak recently has added piercing, scornful characterizations of Netanyahu and his cabinet ministers as jokes, jackasses, pissers, dribblers, simpletons, and people sick with autoimmune diseases. Barak delivers all this dreadful demagoguery alongside incessant use of the epithet messianic in describing policies of the right wing. This, of course, is supremely ironic since the only messianism that exists in abundance is Ehud Barak's presence in his own messianic self-assurance. Ehud Barak's near anti-Semitic language is unacceptable. Whatever you think of the Netanyahu government or judicial reform proposals, Barak's wild exaggerations and exceedingly belligerent characterizations are disgusting. His use of near anti-Semitic and pseudo-BDS language is unacceptable. His feral ambitions and savage hatreds clearly have propelled him off into the deep end. Worst of all, by far worst of all, is the lead role that Barak has taken in calling for subversion of the IDF through mass refusal to serve by Israeli soldiers and reserve duty officers. Barak began barking about the need to refuse to serve in the IDF under dictatorship at a February Haaretz conference. When a black flag of extreme illegality flies over an army order, it is not just right for a soldier to disobey that order, it is his obligation, said Barak. We're now facing the civilian equivalent of black flag illegality. Our only obligation is to liberal democracy as expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We have no obligatory contract with dictators, and history will judge to purgatory all those who submit to dictates of dictators. Asked whether he wasn't going too far with his call for mutiny in the military, Barak responded with his characteristic messianic self-possession that we are on the right side of history and we are not afraid of anybody or anything. On Channel 12 television on July 6th, Barak specifically called upon Air Force pilots and frontline commandos to warn Netanyahu that if the so-called responsibility restriction legislation was passed, they would refuse to serve a dictatorship, period. Reportedly, the Israeli police have opened an investigation into the possibility treasonous remarks made by Barak and the Yair Golan of Meretz. But don't hold your breath waiting for indictments. Prosecuting these people for sedition and concrete damage to the security of the State of Israel will not be politically correct. It would require Israel's legal elites to admit, which they won't, that Barak's discourse is the true threat to Israeli democracy. It would require them to concede, which they won't, that those screaming the loudest about imminent threats to democracy are the people engaging in tactics that smack of dictatorship and lawlessness. It would force them to draw red lines, which they are unwilling to do, against the growing calls from Barak and his cadres to deny political and civil rights to anybody who thinks and votes differently, like Orthodox Jews. This is the place to remind readers of Barak's dismal political record. He was resoundingly defeated in the elections of 2001 and 2009, leading to the once all-powerful Labour Party to a mere nothingness. His term as prime minister was blessedly the shortest term of any Israeli prime minister ever. He was responsible for the helter-skelter retreat from Lebanon, which led to the rise of Hezbollah. His disastrous diplomatic policies led directly to the Second Intifada. The last point is especially important. Barak betrayed the trust Israelis had given him by agreeing at the July 2000 Camp David summit to divide Jerusalem and give away the Temple Mount. This was a radical diplomatic departure from the platform on which he had campaigned and which he had reaffirmed publicly just 2 months earlier. So much for democratic behavior. This reckless gambit, for which Barak had no public mandate, terribly weakened Israel's political hold on Jerusalem. It heedlessly broke an important and rightful Israeli diplomatic taboo about maintaining Jerusalem united under Israeli sovereignty. This transgression undermined a core Jewish claim to legitimacy in Zion, which at its source is rooted in the holiest place on earth to Jews, Jerusalem's Temple Mount. It appreciably enfeebled Israel's diplomatic fortitude. It drove Palestinian expectations sky high and became the baseline for international demands that the city be split into 2 capitals. It later gave cover to other politicians on the left, like Ehud Olmert and Tzipi Levin, to go astray too. It also promptly led to Yasser Arafat's so-called Second Intifada, the most murderous spree of Palestinian terrorism in Israel's history until October 7, 2023. Arafat incorrectly assumed that all Israelis would be as supine as Barak, that several dozen bus bombers would push Israelis over the edge and bring about capitulation in Jerusalem and across Judea and Samaria. And sure enough, Barak almost gave away the store at the January 2001 Tada summit after his government had fallen and despite the raging intifada. For the first time, an Israeli prime minister imprudently accepted the 1967 lines and 97% of Judea and Samaria as the basis for a Palestinian state. Fortunately, Barak was swiftly kicked out of office, and Israelis proved far more resilient and loyal to their principles than either Barak or Arafat imagined. Barak has never expressed remorse for his flagrant offenses, for the near plundering of Jerusalem, and for the near subversion of democracy. God only imagines to what insane ends of surrender Barak might go if he were to regain the reins of power.